morning everybody, good morning, it's JPR and welcome back to another video. Like the Pokemon themselves, the core games are ever changing and evolving, and with that change brings new features. Some cement themselves as mainstays for the future, but others are understandably removed when their time in the spotlight is up. So in this video, I'll be taking a look at some of the best features removed in every Pokemon generation, some being justified and others not being justified at all. You'll see. Let's get started. They did not remove anything. Since Pokemon was still fairly new back in Generation 2, only a couple of things are removed in this generation. The first feature is walking with your starter Pokemon. Obviously, this was limited to just Pikachu in Pokemon Yellow, but nonetheless it's a feature that doesn't exist in Gen 2 at all. I think it would have been a tall order to be able to walk with every Pokemon in existence like they were later able to pull off in Heart Gold and Soul Silver, since Gen 2 only had a handful of overworld sprites, but I think it's disappointing that they didn't at least make it so you could walk with your starter Pokemon. If they had just made sprites for Chikorita, Cyndaquil, Totodile, and their evolutions, that would have only been 27 more sprites when you count the different angles the Pokemon had to be viewed at. But honestly, I think they could have just gotten away with doing one sprite for every evolution line, since the Gen 2 starters basically just get bigger when they evolve. When you count the different angles, that would only be 9 additional sprites added to the game. I don't think that's much to ask for at all. The only other thing that Gen 2 lacked compared to Gen 1 is a minigame of any kind, as Pokemon Yellow also had the Surfing Pikachu minigame. As it stands, Gen 2 is the only generation that lacks a minigame feature. But of course, both of these missing features would be amended in Pokemon Heart Gold and Soul Silver, allowing you to walk with all 493 Pokemon species, and also introduce the Pokeathlon competition, which consists of 10 different minigames. If you want to hear me talk more about the Pokeathlon, I have another video all about minigames and other side events, so you can go check that out when you're done with this video. Don't worry, I got your whole day planned out if you need it. Gen 3 would also remove only 2 notable features, but these were definitely a lot more serious than the ones removed in Gen 2. The most notable one is the inability to transfer Pokemon up from the previous generation, as there was no way to link the Game Boy Color to the Game Boy Advance. Honestly, this one falls more on Nintendo than Game Freak for not releasing some sort of a peripheral or a link cable to make data transfer possible between the two consoles, but I'm willing to bet the fact that hardly any games other than Pokemon would have benefited from this, and the limitations of the technology at the time is the reason why they didn't bother. Now, there are some third-party devices that allow you to transfer Pokemon between these generations, but apparently these Pokemon are no longer deemed as legal since a lot of the under-the-hood features were changed between the console jump. First of all, it's a jump from an 8-bit system to a 32-bit system, so that alone presents a lot of problems. Basically, the way that an individual Pokemon was coded entirely changed between Gens 2 and 3, everything from stat calculations to IVs, EVs, and the newly added natures. Obviously, they were able to iron this out relatively well when they made it possible for Gen 2 Pokemon to jump all the way to Gen 7 through Pokemon Bank on the 3DS, but the fact of the matter is, it was probably far too complicated for 2002. While it's disappointing that many people's original Pokemon were left to die on these old cartridges, the removal of the Pokemon transfer feature in Gen 3 is completely justified. On the other hand, there's the removal of the day and night cycle, which is a lot harder to defend. The Gen 3 games still had the same internal clock that the Gen 2 games did, which is why berries can grow across Hoenn, Eevee can still evolve into either Umbreon or Espeon depending on time of day, and there are still day-based events like the Lily Cove lottery draws, Shoal Cave's changing tides, Mirage Island, and random sales periodically occurring in both Slateport City and Lily Cove City. Unlike a lot of removed features, there was never a concrete reason given for the removal of the day and night cycle. It's possible they just ran out of time, fittingly enough. One of Gen 4's biggest focuses was introducing new features, so it shouldn't come as a shock that this is the only generation where any major features weren't removed. Other than very minor stuff, like cutting down tall grass. Why did I even buy this game? But you know what else wasn't removed in Gen 4? Your subscription to the channel. I know, that was terrible. We're less than 5,000 subscribers away from 120k, so if you're enjoying the video, make sure you're subscribed. Back to the video. So, Gen 5, as beloved as it is where we begin to see a lot more regional features introduced, and many other ones biting the dust. By regional features, I mean one-off things like the Underground in Sinnoh, things that were meant to be exclusive to one region to set that region apart from future regions. According to Junichi Masuda, this is entirely intentional to make sure that there isn't one definitive best region that has all the features that the ones before didn't have. So I'm gonna try to avoid the distinctly regional features and just focus on the ones that really shouldn't have been removed. First up, ball capsules and seals. Seals were a great way to further customize your Pokemon and give them your own unique spark. Unfortunately, they were also a great way to make online Pokemon almost as toxic as a Call of Duty lobby. Now, yeah, they could have just removed the letter-based seals or just used the Gen 5 bad word filter to block certain combinations of letters, but I don't think that's enough to warrant the entire feature being removed. Secret Bases getting removed in this gen was also a really tough pill to swallow. I think they added some great depth to routes that would otherwise be really uninteresting, since you would always be on the lookout for a great spot to build your own private area. They got moved to the underground in Sinnoh, which was still fine in my opinion, especially since that meant you could stumble across your friends' bases at any time, but Unova just doesn't have them at all, and most of the multiplayer activities were moved to the Entralink. I always thought they could have somehow tied them into hidden grottos in Black 2 and White 2, since they were similarly hard to find and only appeared out in the wild. Trainer rematches were also largely removed in Gen 5, since there's no longer a Versus Seeker or other similar device that registers NPCs as contacts. To be fair, Unova is not nearly as grindy as previous regions, thanks to the Lucky Egg you obtain midway through the game, the abundance of Autono across the region, and the new EXP system that rewards you with extra points for being underleveled. So trainer rematches aren't as needed here as in previous generations. Still, I miss the feeling of other trainers constantly training to get back at you. It made the world feel more alive and competitive. Rematches against regular NPCs have still not returned as of Generation 8, outside of Oras, which was a remake, and I think that's the true crime here. Walking Pokemon once again gets removed here, but we've already talked about that before, plus it's a feature that just kinda comes and goes from this point on. Seasons are arguably the biggest removed feature in Gen 6. I know this could be seen as Unova's unique regional feature since it was meant to reflect the diversity of the climate, but I think this is easily a feature that could have been carried over to future generations. Even if it's not nearly as in-depth as it was in Unova, it could be purely aesthetic differences, like the colors of the landscape and the music of the routes. Plus, it would just give Deerling and Sawsbuck an excuse to transform every once in a while. Speaking of changing music, that's another thing that Kalos eradicates completely. Changing music was first introduced in Gen 2, with the Wild Battle theme, At Night, being noticeably less intense than the day version. Gen 4 would refine this with changing music for almost all of the major areas in Sinnoh depending on the time of day. Although Gen 5's music didn't change depending on time of day, the music would change depending on the season or if you were close to the musicians performing in the cities. Music would also change mid-battle in Gen 5 with the low HP theme and the Gym Leader's Last Pokemon theme. In extreme contrast, Kalos' music is incredibly stagnant and does not change at all throughout the game. Even the gyms go back to sharing the same theme after Black 2 and White 2 gave every gym its own unique theme. To me, it's really hard to defend this one. Bare minimum, they should have had different day and night themes, although they did return in Pokemon Sun and Moon, albeit in a much more limited way. The GB sounds previously present in Heart Gold and Soul Silver are also removed from Oras, so if you want to experience the game with the old nostalgic music, well, then too bad. The difficulty settings introduced in Black 2 and White 2 are also dropped here, and gosh, what a poor time to do it too, since X and Y is arguably the easiest pair of Pokemon games. I know in my video about weird features I criticized the implementation of the difficulty settings, but there's no good reason to give it to us and then immediately take it away. Trainer rematches continue to be removed as well, with gym leaders not getting any proper rematches. Instead you fight against them in a much weaker state at the Battle Chateau. Yay! This is really what bugs me the most about Gen 6. There's so many little things that got taken away from the game that weren't hard to implement and would have made the experience strictly better. Probably the coolest new feature introduced in Gen 6, Soaring, immediately gets taken out in Gen 7. I get Alola is like 90% ocean, so it probably wouldn't have been nearly as enthralling to soar across Alola as it was in Hoenn. I get there's not really a good reason for it to come back other than it was cool, but like, that's just it. It was really cool. And now fast traveling is back to being the same old boring process that it's always been. They could have at least given us two separate ride Pokemon, like maybe you get the super fast Aerodactyl for fast traveling, and you get Charizard if you want the more leisurely soaring experience. They already gave us 2 different Pokemon for surfing, so this idea isn't too far out there. We also lose some of the great bottom screen features like the player search system for the... don't even make me say it. Super Training, Dex Nav, and basically every other bottom screen feature aside from Pokemon Ami, which was revamped in the Pokemon Refresh this generation, are also removed. The bottom screen in general has lost most of its utility this generation due to Rotom's face and map being the only thing displayed, and then he gets sad if you don't play with or talk to him every 7 minutes in the Ultra games.
Stop it. Get some help.
I don't want to use his broken Roto power. Stop making me feel guilty for ignoring him. Actually, I shouldn't feel guilty at all, seeing as how Rotom doesn't even come with the National Dex installed, making Gen 7 the first gen to lack one. But unlike Generation 8, in Gen 7 all 807 Pokemon at the time were included and playable. I imagine the only reason the National Dex didn't carry over is because the Rotom Dex introduced brand new Dex entries for every Pokemon, including alternate forms that didn't have entries at all before. Basically, they just didn't want to write a paragraph or two for the other 400 Pokemon that weren't in the regional Dex. Now yes, Gen 7 does technically have a national Pokedex in the form of Pokemon Banks, but it's infinitely stripped down compared to the traditional Dexes that have always been in the core games. Even if they didn't want to write all that new material, it's still just really annoying that there's no way to track how many total species you've caught in the Gen 7 games beyond the base 400 Pokemon in the Dex. We also lost Horde battles, triple battles, and rotation battles, but these are all much more justified since it would have been nearly impossible for the 3DS to run these, seeing as how Sun and Moon already used an incredible amount of processing power, due in part to how much more detailed the battle scene is. And finally, a positive remove feature, HMs are gone now. About time. Oh boy, the comments are gonna have a field day with this one. Let's get the most obvious one out of the way, all Pokemon and moves not being in the game. Yeah, that's a pretty darn big one. I have a whole video on it, add to the list, or don't. I'm sure you've heard enough about this topic, moving on. Mega Evolution and Z-Moves, 2 of the most prominent features from Gen 6 and 7, are also notably replaced by Dynamax here. Now, I know a lot of people are also mad about this one still, but honestly, it's a little more understandable, because stacking all 3 of these features together in one generation just sounds like a competitive mess in my opinion. At the same time, I never saw these as permanent features to begin with, but it's understandable why people would be upset to lose Mega Evolutions, especially if some of them had grown to be people's favorite Pokemon. It's like your dad buying you a shiny new toy, and then a couple years later he comes back and says, actually, you're not allowed to play with that one anymore. Sorry, Buster. The GTS is, well, pseudo-removed, I should say. It's now gated behind Pokemon Home as opposed to being a feature baked into the game. Kinda hard to defend this one, gotta be honest, especially since GTS had been a staple in every game for the last 15 years. Kinda whack, Game Freak, not gonna lie. Also, this is a really weird one that flew under the radar of all that other mess. There is no longer any way to grow berries, at least in Sword and Shield. I'm sure it will be back in the Sinnoh remakes. Still, another staple mechanic dating all the way back to Generation 3 is gone. Location-based evolutions is another feature that was abandoned in Sword and Shield. Again, it will probably come back in the remakes. The Moss and Ice Rocks that evolved Eevee, the Magnetic Field that evolved Nosepass, Magneton, and Charjabug, and Crabrawler's general existence have all been erased. Now, all of these Pokemon evolve through their respective elemental stones. Gee, after all this negativity, I kinda wanna balance this out with a positive video about the best features from every generation, so if that sounds up your alley, make sure you hit that like button, and be sure you subscribe so you don't miss any future videos. I'll see you guys next time.